What if the difference between life and death for the most feared man in Marseille was nothing more than 4 whispered words from the last person anyone would suspect? A single brush of fingers under a candlelit table. A forgotten memory from years ago. A choice that could end her quietly, or change the shadows of an entire city. This isn't fiction. This is the real night a waitress became the only person who saw the poison coming. Welcome back to Real Life Echo, the channel where true stories don't just end, they echo forever. If you're here for the first time, hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what we're building next. If your pulse is already quickening from that hook alone, smash the like button and let's step into the darkness together. Pause, harbor wave sound effect. The single candle at the center table had burned down exactly 51 minutes, wax pooling like slow blood, when Lila Moreau understood she might have to trade her safety for a stranger's life. Not all at once. Dangerous choices rarely arrive in thunder. They gather like fog over the port, one quiet breath at a time, between pouring wine no one ordered, between ignoring words that could get listeners killed, between pretending the weight in her chest was just another long shift. Lila had spent 28 years perfecting invisibility. Invisible when debt collectors banged on the thin door of her family's cramped apartment after her father's sudden heart attack. Invisible when grief and double, sometimes triple, shifts left her so tired her hands trembled holding trays. Invisible when she served men who kept pistols tucked inside tailored jackets near every exit of Le Vieux Fair, the weathered restaurant clinging to the edge of Marseille's old harbor like it had always known trouble would come. Le Vieux Fair wasn't just a restaurant. It was a relic, dark oak panels soaked in cigarette smoke from generations past, low amber lamps casting long shadows that felt deliberate, the air thick with aged Bordeaux roasted garlic, sea salt drifting through cracked windows, and something sharper underneath, maybe rosemary from the kitchen, maybe the metallic tang of danger carried on the night wind from the docks. Tonight the entire space, every table, every chair, every corner, had been claimed by one man, Victor Hale. Victor didn't book restaurants. He requisitioned them. His name wasn't splashed across tabloids or whispered for entertainment. It was spoken the way people talk about incoming storms in coastal villages. Low, serious, necessary. Shipping routes that moved cargo no one asked questions about. Money that flowed through the port like invisible rivers. Power that didn't need to shout because silence was louder. In the narrow streets where Lila grew up, where laundry hung between buildings and kids learned early which alleys to avoid, his name was survival knowledge. You didn't gossip about Victor Hale. You adjusted your life around him. He sat dead center in a charcoal suit so deep it drank the light, posture loose yet coiled, like a panther resting but never truly asleep. Across from him sat Luca Moretti, a Naples-born logistics magnate whose smile stretched wide and friendly while his eyes stayed narrow and cold, always measuring, always counting. They were midway through the main course, thick cuts of steak au poivre, blood still pooling on white plates, when Lila approached with the third bottle of 2015 Chateau Margaux. Conversation stopped for exactly 1 second as she tilted the bottle, ruby liquid catching candle flame, then resumed the instant she stepped back. She'd noticed it from the first pour. These men spoke freely around staff. Waitresses in their world were part of the decor, silent, useful, forgettable. Lila didn't mind being forgettable. Forgettable things heard everything. By 8:27 p.m. she'd mentally mapped 6 armed figures. 4 positioned at the main entrances and side doors, 1 lingering near the swinging kitchen door, 1 standing casually by the narrow window that looked out onto the unlit alley where crates sometimes disappeared overnight. They wore sharp suits and practiced smiles, good enough to pass as executive protection at a high-stakes meeting. But their eyes gave them away. They didn't scan the room like normal security. They fixed on specific people, specific angles. They communicated in the smallest flickers, glances that needed no words. Lila had grown up in a neighborhood where eyes spoke entire sentences. She read the language fluently and hated every syllable of it. The evening had begun at 6 o'clock sharp. She arrived to find Le Vieux Fair transformed. Regular customers politely turned away at the door, usual staff reduced to a skeleton crew of 5. Her manager, Paul, a small, perpetually anxious man who always smelled faintly of garlic, had pulled her into the dry storage room between sacks of rice and crates of olive oil. His voice barely above a whisper, "Head down tonight, Lila. Speak only if directly addressed. And for God's sake, no eye contact with the men at the doors." She had nodded once. The job was her lifeline. 17 months earlier her mother had died after a long, quiet battle with illness, leaving behind debts that clung like damp rot, medical bills, back rent, loans from men who Didn't believe in forgiveness. Lila needed every euro. So she moved like smoke through the room, glasses refilled before empty, napkins refold, invisible perfection. Then came the moment the night fractured. She had knelt beside Victor's table to smooth a stubborn crease in the long white tablecloth that draped to the floor. As she reached underneath, her fingertips grazed the underside of the polished wood, precisely where his right hand naturally settled every time he leaned forward to drive home a point in conversation. The contact was brief, almost nothing. But when she drew her hand back, her skin felt coated in something slick. Not spilled wine. Not condensation. A thin, clear, slightly tacky film that caught the dim light like oil on water. She felt her stomach drop but betrayed nothing. That stillness, how she simply stood, smoothed her apron and walked away, would replay in her mind for years. She carried her empty tray to the kitchen pass-through, set it down beside the dish station, and only then allowed herself to examine her fingers under the weak fluorescent bulb. The substance was almost imperceptible. You would never notice it unless you touched it. And no one ever touched that exact spot under the table, except Victor Hale. Pause, tense string music swell. The memory arrived like ice water poured down her spine. 3 years earlier her cousin Marco, only 24, always laughing, always talking about buying his mother a better apartment, had taken a late-night cleanup job at a shipyard on the industrial edge of the port. The task was simple: remove old barnacle buildup from decommissioned hulls using an industrial solvent gel. Colorless, odorless, engineered to dissolve slowly and silently. He had brushed against a poorly marked surface while working. The absorption happened through skin, gradual, invisible. For the first few hours he felt nothing unusual. Then came fatigue. Nausea. By the 4th day he was in intensive care, liver enzymes skyrocketing, kidneys beginning to shut down. The doctors had spoken to the family in careful, measured tones. Dermal contact only. No immediate pain or visible damage. The compound mimicked natural organ failure so convincingly that, without Marco's weak mention of the gel during a lucid moment, they would have listed cause of death as multi-organ failure due to unknown cardiac event, and closed the case forever. Lila had sat beside his bed for 3 nights, holding his hand while machines hissed and beeped. She remembered the exact texture of that gel residue on his palm when they finally explained it: sticky, clear, almost innocent-looking. She remembered vowing never to forget. Now she stood at the dish station in Levue Fair, fingers held slightly away from her body as if they belonged to someone else. Around her the kitchen continued its rhythm, plates clattering into sinks, Paul muttering about plating timing, another server asking where the backup corkscrew had gone. All of it normal. All of it utterly disconnected from the cold weight blooming behind her sternum. She ran scalding water over her hand twice, scrubbing until skin reddened. Then she stood motionless for nearly 2.5 minutes, counting slow breaths, forcing her thoughts into order. The gel had been applied only on Victor's side of the table. Not Luca Moretti's. She had observed him all evening, his right hand returning instinctively to that edge again and again. An unconscious tick of a man who gestured widely, who spoke with his whole body. He would touch it at least 8 or 10 more times before dessert arrived. By the time the last plates were cleared, he would walk out into the Marseille night feeling perfectly fine. By morning the silent sabotage inside his organs would already be irreversible. By the time doctors ran tests, if anyone even thought to run specialized toxicology, the gel would have evaporated, the table would have been wiped clean by staff, and Victor Hale's death certificate would read sudden cardiac failure, or natural organ collapse. A perfect patient assassination. She weighed her options in those long seconds. Approach one of Victor's own guards near the main entrance? She considered it for perhaps 7 heartbeats before dismissing it. Luca Moretti's men were positioned closer, deliberately closer. She had noticed the seating arrangement earlier in the evening. Moretti had subtly directed it. His security formed a soft, invisible barrier between Victor and every exit, every loyal man, every path that wasn't under Moretti's control. If she spoke to the wrong person she would be quietly removed through the back door. The dinner would proceed exactly as scripted. Silence whispered louder. She could finish her shift. Walk home through the narrow streets. Tell herself she wasn't completely certain. Maybe the substance was something else, maybe she was wrong. Tell herself that men like Victor Hale made powerful enemies every day. She didn't need to understand the reasons. She could go to bed. Tomorrow morning the radio or a neighbor would mention a prominent figure had died unexpectedly at the port. She could remember Marco's yellow-tinged skin under hospital lights, the way machines breathed for him when he couldn't, and carry for the rest of her life the knowledge that she had stood 3 feet away from prevention, and chosen to do nothing. She lifted the bottle again. Walked back into the dining room. Luca Moretti was laughing now, hand flat on the table, telling a story with the enthusiasm of a man who believed victory was already his. Victor listened with only half his attention, the other half calm, distant, already calculating moves far ahead. His right hand rested 1 centimeter from the invisible death. Lila moved around to his right side. She leaned in at the precise angle she used 100 times a night to adjust a misplaced glass or straighten cutlery. Her hand remained completely steady. Later she would think about that steadiness, how it felt almost inhuman. She tilted his wine glass slightly as if checking for a smudge. Brought her mouth close, 6 inches from his ear. Lips moved the barest minimum. "Sir. Look under the table. Don't touch it." She straightened. Set the bottle down gently. Turned and drifted toward the far side of the room as though nothing had occurred. She did not look back. She did not glance at Moretti. She fixed her eyes on the far wall and walked at exactly her normal pace. The skin on the back of her neck prickled with cold. She could not see what Victor did next. She would not know for at least 40 seconds, perhaps longer, whether he had heard her whisper, whether he believed the impossible warning from a stranger, or whether one of Moretti's watchers had read the shape of her lips in the candlelight. 40 seconds stretched into a full agonizing minute. She refilled a water glass near the window overlooking the dark harbor. She straightened a napkin that needed no straightening. She kept her breathing slow and even. And then, from the very edge of her vision, she saw it. Victor reached into his jacket pocket, for nothing in particular. Paused. Let his linen napkin slip deliberately from his lap to the floor. He bent to retrieve it, casual motion, the slightly irritated gesture of a man inconvenienced by a minor detail. He remained below the table line for no more than 4 seconds. When he rose, napkin in hand, his expression had not altered by a fraction. He placed it back on his knee. He resumed speaking to Moretti. He lifted his wine glass with his left hand instead. And when he leaned forward a moment later to make a point, both hands remained clasped behind his back. The table edge stayed untouched. Luca Moretti noticed. It was the smallest thing, the absence of a hand on wood. But he had been watching for precisely that gesture. His wide smile locked rigid at the corners. His eyes flicked once around the room, quick, professional sweep. Victor did not look at Lila. He did not look down at the table. He looked straight across at Luca Moretti and said in the calm tone one uses to comment on the weather, "Strange. I received a warning tonight, not to touch anything." The air in the room thickened until it pressed against eardrums. No one moved. Luca laughed, a warm, practiced sound that hit every right note. A warning? From whom? Victor held his gaze without blinking. "You'd be surprised," he said softly, "who actually pays attention." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The guard who had stood motionless beside a tall floor lamp for the past 2 hours stepped forward without hurry. In his hand, a plain white cloth. He ran it slowly along the underside of the table near Victor's chair. Held it up to the candlelight. A faint, sticky sheen glistened. Undeniable. "Test it," Victor said. Quiet. Final. Long pause, heavy silence, heartbeat sound effect. What happened next unfolded in near total silence. That quiet would remain with Lila for the rest of her life. How true power rarely shouts. A man she had never seen before entered from the alley door carrying a small black case. He moved directly to the table, opened the case, worked swiftly and methodically. He spoke in low tones to Victor. Victor nodded once, slow, completely unsurprised, as though this outcome had always been one possibility among many. Luca Moretti attempted to stand. 2 men were already positioned behind his chair. No raised voices. No drawn weapons. Simply a calm, practiced redirection toward the rear exit. The kind of efficiency that comes only from repetition. Moretti said something as he was guided away, words too low for Lila to catch across the room. She saw only his face, the wide, confident smile gone completely, eyes finally showing something raw and human, fear for the first time that entire night. The back door opened and closed with a soft click. Silence returned like falling dust. Victor rose slowly beside the table. Hands loose at his sides. Expression unchanged, stone calm. He looked at the remaining men in the room, his men. Something wordless passed between them. Then he reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced a silk handkerchief. He wiped the back of his right hand, carefully, methodically, the hand that had never once touched the poisoned edge. He set the handkerchief down on the table and did not pick it up again. It was the most deliberate, controlled gesture Lila had ever witnessed. The dinner was over. Paul appeared from the kitchen doorway, visibly trembling. He instructed the remaining staff to begin clearing, quietly without making eye contact with anyone still present. Lila moved to a side table and began collecting glasses. Her movements automatic, her mind a storm of noise and sudden quiet. She was steps from the kitchen door when one of Victor's men stepped gently into her path. Not threatening. Simply present. He glanced toward the narrow staircase at the back of the room. Mr. Hale would like a word. She followed him up. The office was small and felt genuinely used, not a stage for displaying power but a working space. Uneven stacks of papers. A coat draped over the back of a chair. A single window framing the smeared lights of the harbor on black water. Victor stood with his back to her when she entered. He turned slowly. Looked at her the way one studies something unfamiliar, not unkindly, not warmly. Completely. How did you know? She told him everything. Marco. The shipyard job he took to help his mother. The unmarked barrel. The gel on his skin. The hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. The exact texture of the residue, sticky, clear, almost nothing. She admitted she had not been 100% certain, perhaps 93% at best. She described the 2.5 minutes she stood at the dish station, weighing whether to speak at all. She explained that her decision had not been about him. Not loyalty, not calculation, not hope of reward. It had been about Paul. About the other 2 servers still clearing tables downstairs. If Victor had died tonight and questions came later, they would have been the first dragged in, ordinary people with no money for lawyers, no connections, no way to prove they hadn't known. People exactly like her. He listened without interruption. When she finished, silence stretched. For the first time she noticed the weariness behind his eyes, not physical exhaustion but something older, deeper, carried for years. You saw what trained men missed, he said quietly. He offered her a position. Not waitressing. Something closer. Within his operations. Protected. The word, protection, carried real weight when he said it, not a veiled threat wrapped in generosity, but an actual promise he could deliver. She refused. Clearly. Without hesitation or apology. She watched his face for any shift in temperature. There was none. He simply waited, like a man who had enough power and time to let others find their own words. The absence of pressure felt almost disorienting. No charm turned on like a switch. No subtle menace. Just patience. The staff, she said. Paul and the others, they had nothing to do with this. They should be able to come to work tomorrow without being afraid. He considered her for a long moment. Agreed. She left the office the same way she had come, down the narrow staircase, past the now empty dining room where candles were being extinguished one by one. She collected her coat from the staff room. She stepped out through the kitchen door into the cool, salt-heavy Marseille night. She stood on the uneven cobblestones for a long minute, breathing the harbor air, listening to distant ships and gulls. Then she walked home. She sat at her small kitchen table in the dark. No lights. No television. Just quiet. She thought about Marco's hand in hers in that hospital room. Thought about her mother's debts and the men who came to collect. Loud, crude, somehow less frightening than Victor's quiet precision. She thought about the single brush of her fingers under that table. How close she had come to simply wiping them on her apron and continuing her shift. How the entire night had rested on a memory she had never chosen to keep, and a decision she had not fully articulated until it was already made. She was not a brave person. She was certain of that. She was someone who, once, had refused to stand by and do nothing. Whether that refusal was courage, stubbornness, decency, or something nameless, she did not need to define it. She sat in the dark until exhaustion finally pulled her towards sleep. 3 weeks later she found an unmarked envelope tucked inside her locker at Levue Fair. Cash, enough to change things. No note. No name. She told no one. She left Marseille quietly, train south along the coast, ferry across to a smaller island, another train inland. Toward the modest life she had been saving for, piece by painful piece, for 3 long years. She never spoke of that night to anyone. She took a job in a small family-run restaurant in a different city. Poured wine for ordinary people who smiled without calculation. No armed men near exits. No shadows that felt alive. She welcomed the boredom like a long-awaited gift. Victor Hale remained in power. Luca Moretti disappeared from the port negotiations, not with drama or headlines, but with the quiet finality of someone told their chapter was over. Shipping routes were quietly renegotiated. Business continued. The dark machinery of the docks kept turning. And in certain rooms, after certain meals, in low voices among people who understood weight, a quiet piece of information began to circulate. Not a loud legend. Not myth. Just fact. A man had been targeted with extraordinary patience and precision. Every detail accounted for. Every variable considered, except one. A waitress with steady hands and a memory she had never intended to use. 4 words leaned close in passing. And because Victor Hale had survived as long as he had by distinguishing signal from noise, truth from distraction, he had listened. That was the entire story. Extended reflective pause, soft piano under harbor ambience. I've been away from real-life echo for a while now, and I want to be completely honest with you. It wasn't just a casual break. I was going deeper, researching harder, studying how real stories resonate, making sure that when I came back, every single tale would be worth every minute of your attention. Your time, your focus, it's everything to me. I didn't want to return with more of the same. I wanted to come back stronger. Better. And stories like this are exactly why. If this one gripped you, if it made your heart beat faster, if it kept you listening until the very last word, then you already know what this channel is about. So if you haven't already, please subscribe right now. Turn on the notification bell. Because what's coming next is going to hit even harder. And before you leave, drop a comment below. What would you have done in Lila's shoes? Whisper those 4 words and risk everything? Or walk away, stay invisible, protect yourself? Be honest. I read every single comment. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves real-life twists and dark decisions. They need to hear this. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. This echo is yours now. I'll see you in the next one, very soon.